All right, in this lesson, we're going to learn how to do long division. For some of you, this is the first time you've seen this. For some of you, you've learned this and you used to know it, but you forgot. And some of you maybe have seen it, but you never really learned it all that well. It's okay. I'm going to run through it from the very start. So to start off with, we have 3 pieces of vocabulary. They sound fancy, but they're pretty straightforward. So in any division problem, you have the quotient, that's the answer. So 24 divided by 4 gives you 6. 6 is the quotient. You have the divisor, that's what you're dividing by. So 4 would be the divisor in this example. It's like how many groups you're breaking something up into. And then the dividend. I don't use that one very much, but it does mean the number you are dividing. So 24 is the number you're starting with. Make sure to write those down before you move on. All right, so we're going to take the first problem really slow and write out each step as we go. So the first thing you need to do is remember which number goes where in your long division problem. So set up your long division bracket thingy, and the dividend goes underneath it. That's the number you're dividing. And the divisor, remember that's what you're dividing by, goes right outside to the left. And then, of course, up top is going to be where we put our answer, the quotient. It's important to note that it's not always the bigger number that goes underneath, because you're going to learn that we do this when we're dividing fractions, where actually the smaller number goes underneath. So you do actually need to know whether it's the number you're dividing or the number you're dividing by that goes underneath. All right, so I like to use a little acronym to remember the steps. So DMSB, so D stands for divide, M stands for multiply, S stands for subtract, and B stands for bring down. So our first step is to divide. So we check how many times our divisor can go into the first digit of the dividend. So how many times can 5 go into the 7? Well, 5 goes into 7 once. We just care about how many times it goes in whole without worrying about whether there's something left over or not. And then we're on the multiplication step. Actually, before we move on, we should write down each step. We're only going to do this for the first one, but how many times does 5 go into 7? That's the first thing we did. We wrote the 1 up top. So next is multiply. So we multiply that number that we just came up with, the 1, by the divisor, the 1 times the 5. And that gives us 5. And we write it down below the 7. So we subtract. Oh, and then when we subtract, that gives us 2. And so now we're on our last step, the bring down. So we bring down the next digit, which would be a 6. And then we start all over again. After the bring down, we go back up to divide. So now, but instead of seeing how many times it goes into the numbers up top, we're going to be seeing how many times it goes into that 26 down below. So 5 goes into 26 5 times. So that was step number 1. Step number 2, multiply. Now it's 5 times 5. Gives us 25. Then we subtract. That leaves us 1. Now we're back at bring down. So we bring down the 0, and it becomes 10. So now we're back at divide. How many times does 5 go into 10? That's 2. 2 times 5 is 10. We subtract, we get 0. Since there's no more digits to bring down, that means we're done. And then when you're finished, you could always check your work to make sure. You could do 152 times 5 and make sure that that does actually equal 760, which it does. All right, so if after that brief review you remember how to do long division and you think you can do it now, then go ahead and pause and work these examples by yourself, and then you can just check to make sure your answers are right and move on to the practice problem. If you are still confused, you have never really been taught long division before, you definitely need some more practice, then just keep watching and I'll help you through them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write that acronym up at the top. So divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and then an arrow showing that we start back over again. All right, so on the first problem, we're going to set this up. The dividend, 348, goes underneath. The divisor, 4, goes outside. Now this one's a little bit different from the last one because when I try and do the first step of how many times does 4 go into 3, well, it doesn't go in. 3 is smaller than 4. But it's okay. I just need to move over and use the first 2 digits instead. So how many times does 4 go into 34? So we should write that down. When the divisor is bigger than the first digit, use the first 2 digits instead. So that means that I'm going to be seeing how many times 4 goes into 34, which is 8. That was my divide step. Next, I'm going to multiply. 8 times 4 gives me 32. That step should feel easy because you already should have done that math in order to figure out how many times it goes in, right? You figured that out by saying 4. Okay, how many 5 times does 4 go in? Well, 9's too big because that's 36, so it must be 8. 8 goes in 32 times. Now we subtract, and that leaves us with 2. Then we have our bring down step, so we're going to bring down the 8. That gives us 28. And we start all over again with divide, but now we're dividing down here with that new number we just made. So how many times does 4 go into 28? 7. And then we finish it out to see if we're done or not. So 7 times 4 gives us 28. We subtract, we get 0. And that makes us feel happy inside because that means we're done. All right, so on the next one, first we set it up, do it now. And then we start. So how many times does 6 go into 2? None. Same as the last one, but 6 does go into 22. In fact, it goes in 3 times. Now my multiply step. 3 times 6 is 18. Subtract, that gives me 4. I bring down to get 42. And now we're back to where we started again. So how many times does 6 go into 42? Well, that happens to be exactly 7. So then 7 times 6 gives us 42. Subtract, we get 0. We bring down our next digit. That gives us 2. And now we're back at the divide step. So how many times does 6 go into 2? Uh-oh. It doesn't. 6 is too big. It goes in 0 times. We make sure to record that 0 up top. This is one of the top mistakes in long division. And so now, just like what we would do if that first digit was too small, we can bring down another digit. So now we're seeing how many times 6 goes into 22. Well, we've already done that math before. It gives us 3. So this is going to be the same too. 18. We subtract. We get 4. We bring down another 2. 6 goes into 42 7 times. And 7 times 6 is 42. And when we subtract there, we get 0. So we know that we're done. Let's do our last one. So we set it up with our dividend underneath and our divisor to the side. And now this divisor is big. I did this on purpose, trying to pick some that maybe we wouldn't be able to do totally in our head. So 15 Does that go into 3? No. Does 15 go into 34? Sure. 15 goes into 34 twice. And if we don't know that, it's really helpful to sometimes make a list of your 15s. So 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90, 105, 120, 135, and 150, all the way up to the 10s. Okay, so we know 15 goes into 34 twice because it gives us 30. Now we're at the subtract step. That leaves us with 4. Now we bring down a 3 and we start over. So how many times does 15 go into 43? Well, I can look at my menu and see it wants to go in there 3 times, but not big enough. It still only goes in twice, leaving me with 30. We subtract and get 13. Bring down a 5. And now I look at my menu again. I want it to go in. There it is. So I count till I find it. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And 9 times 15 from my menu I know is 135. So that means I'm done. 3,435 divided by 15 is 229. All right, so now we have one more problem for you, our practice problem. So you're going to try and do this on your own to the best of your ability, and then we're going to check it in class tomorrow. Good luck.